Now we're going to teach you about exposing for the face. Now, in essence, there's always going to be a ratio of bright light to dark light, and that would avoid the possibility of having a flat light. In other words, the difference between the bright side and the dark side creates a kind of a molding for your shot, and that creates the three-dimensionality we were speaking about, which looks 3D on a two-dimensional screen. So, this is how you do it. Your camera, your video camera, is a light meter in its own right. And what it will do is, when you're on a wide-ish shot like this, is it will measure the light, the incident light in that entire area. So as you can see, we're on f3.4 down here. If I was to go onto auto, right, it opens the iris up. Why is that? Well, because your camera is seeing all the dark area here and over here, and it's thinking that you want to expose for that too. It doesn't know that you want to expose for the face. So that's exactly why it opens up to help compensate for all the dark areas in frame. But of course that starts blowing her out a bit. So we go back to manual, see it opened all the way up to 1.7, and we shut down to what is a good exposure. Somewhere around about 3.1, I would say, for the mood we're looking. And you can use your exposure to create a greater mood. As you can see here, if this was a horror movie, we would probably put it somewhere over there. And if this was a music video and we wanted that like blown out look, we go wide open and get that look. So don't forget, your camera, when it uses its light meter, reads everything that's in frame, the entire thing. And that's why, were there to be a very bright background, what would happen is, like the sun or a bright wall, what would happen is your camera would shut down to compensate for that very bright background. And your person would go dark. And we've spoken about this before. It's called pumping of the lens, especially when you're on auto. And that's no good. So, set your exposure manually if you ever want to get a proper shot. But now, how to understand the difference in the ratio between the bright and the dark side? You can use your camera as a reflective light meter, in other words, a spot meter. Your camera can measure for you the areas in frame and their particular exposures by using the zoom, and it's that simple. When you zoom in, and you zoom into a bright side of the face, by using the automatic, and your camera does know what a good exposure for that area is, provided you single out that area that you want to expose for. Go to auto, and when you click back off auto, it will hold that particular exposure. Now when you come out, because you've exposed specifically for the bright side of the face over here, it looks perfect. However, another way of doing this, if you wanted to blow out the face a bit, you would zoom in to the dark side of the face, telling the camera, this is what I want to expose for. You take it off manual, put it back onto manual, it freezes the f-stop as you were, and when you zoom out, you will see the bright side of the face is a little too bright for your shot. Basically, the trick is to understand the difference in lighting ratios between the dark side of your face and the bright side of your face, and then decide which side of the face to expose for. Sometimes it's somewhere in the middle, and you would use both. If you ever have a scenario where everything around the person that you're shooting is either very bright or very dark, zoom into the face, forcing the camera to use its light meter to expose for the areas that you do want to expose for, and 9 times out of 10 you just want to expose to the face. You don't care if the background is bright or dark. As long as that face looks good, you have a professional shot. And that's what you do. You take the camera off manual, You let it expose, click it back onto manual. It freezes the iris where it was for that particular reading, and then when you come out to include the extra dark or bright areas in the background, the camera doesn't adjust for that. Here we are. We're going to show you the difference in lighting ratios between the dark side of her face, and we do that by zooming in and then putting the camera onto auto iris, and it takes a reading, and when we come out we see that the bright side of her face is way overexposed, and that might be the look you're looking for. Okay? The other option would, if you want to expose for the bright side of her face and let the other side go very dark, you zoom into that which is bright in the shot. You take it off manual, the auto adjusts and exposes properly for the bright side of her face. You saw that adjustment. Click it back, and you see now it's gone to 5.2. Click it back to manual, and as I come out, look how much darker the dark side of her face is. You've managed to accentuate the shadows of the shot. This look is achieved by exposing for the different sides of the face, using the camera as a reflective or a spotlight meter, by zooming it in and getting a specific reading on a specific area of your shot, as opposed to going wider on the shot and the camera reading the light from the entire frame. Now what we've done is, to illustrate the point, we've put a bright background in the background. And remember that the camera is measuring the entire frame. It's measuring the light in the entire frame. It's on manual now. I'm going to click the camera to auto, and let's see what it does. There you see that adjustment. Now you've all seen this when you're shooting and someone walks in front of a window and all of a sudden your shot goes dark and your face disappears. That's because it's measuring the bright areas around here and here, and then shutting down the iris to compensate for that. But you, as a professional now, want to make sure that the face is exposed properly. So what you do is you use your camera as a spot meter. In other words, zoom it in to the area of the face that you do want to expose for. And as you go in, you take the camera, it's on auto already, you take it onto manual. Don't worry about focus, because you're not dealing in focus now, you're dealing in light. You take it onto manual because it's taken a reading for that particular frame, the average over that particular area, and as you zoom out, it holds that iris setting and the face is properly exposed, allowing the background now to not be properly exposed and blow out a little bit, which doesn't look bad. Provided the face is properly exposed, you often don't really care too much about what the background exposure is doing. When I go back to an auto setting here, you will see the camera adjusts, and look how dark she gets. Her skin gets murky, and it's not a professional shot at all. So that shows you the difference. Use your camera as a spot meter so that you can isolate the areas that you do want to expose for, and set it onto manual while you are zoomed in on the place that you want to expose for. Now remember, with these modern little DV cams and so on, that your gain setting is often set on automatic, and it will adjust the exposure of your shot to include everything that you see, and your shutter speed, if it's set on auto, will also do the exact same thing. So you have to set the gain to 0. Gain creates snow in your shot, and you wouldn't want to use it. You set it to 0 manually, and you set your shutter to 50 or 60 manually so that it doesn't adjust. Because if you don't have that situation, your auto shutter will not allow you to isolate the face. To give you an idea of that, I zoom in, I take an exposure on the face, put it back to manual, and when I zoom out, the auto shutter kicks in, and there you can see it's making her dark. So it's a little bit of a dangerous situation. You need to understand your camera, and you need to put that shutter to a stock standard setting, a locked off setting. You see it's gone to 100 now, as you can see on the screen. So that would be something of a problem. Go back to 50 or 60, which is standard, and zoom in just to complete the lesson. Take your exposure by going to auto, use the camera's light meter to give you a good exposure, and watch out for including bright areas. You can see the adjustments happening. See what happens as you ask the camera to adjust. Put it onto manual, freezing the iris, and as you come out, you have a perfectly exposed shot, no matter what your background is doing. Rather, put your gain on naught, freezing it there, freeze your shutter, and set your iris so that you have complete control of the cinematic elements of your shot. This is vital for professional shooting. Always listen to your camera when it asks for an ND filter, because without it, the technological parameters of your shot are completely outside of the bounds of the camera's abilities. In choosing a background, try and balance the background so that there's some differentiating aspects, such as the trees or aspects of your scene. And then in this case, we've got the sun coming in as a backlight, and that avoids, it's exactly the same location, but we've chosen a different background with a different relative position of the sun. And what that does is allows a nice rimming backlight to hit your subject, and the background is in shadow, which means that your foreground is going to be bright and your background is going to be dark, therefore differentiating the two and creating more of a three-dimensional look again, which is what we've been talking about all along, getting 2D to look 3D. Now, this is an extreme example of what we're dealing with. Both cameras have got considerable flare. You can mask it off with your hand, as we're doing now, but you need to keep your hand out of shot. So sometimes it's better to mask it from further away. Get someone to hold or put a stand in with a little blocker to stop the flare. Much of your shooting will be done exterior, using the sun as your key light, and this is one of the situations that one is often faced with a very bright background. In this case, the sky, it's extreme. Could be snow, it could be the sea, or a bright white wall. And we're going to show you how to manipulate the shot so that it can still be usable despite those conditions. Now, what you're seeing is that the camera itself is measuring the bright areas around the model and then shutting the iris down in order to compensate for the bright light, and she becomes silhouette. And by the way, this is a way to achieve a silhouette shot if you require it. But we're going to fix it by that same old trick of zooming into the face, taking exposure on that which you do want to expose for, using the automatic of the camera to get that exposure, and then setting it back onto manual so that it holds the actual exposure. And there you can see it's certainly a lot better, but it's not really professional yet. We're going to bounce back a little bit of light into the shot, and that will create a proper look where we compensate for their exposure, and suddenly the shot is looking much, much better and is completely technically acceptable. Okay. Don't forget to find the hot spot on your reflectors by tilting on both axes, the X and the Y axes, finding the hot spot while looking at your model, while looking at her, finding the best spot, and then freezing in that position. Obviously, reflectors on stands have to be adjusted every once in a while as the sun moves. But there you can see we have something that's quite acceptable. Don't forget though that when you have a flare, you're going to need someone to block out the flare and make sure that the blocker of the flare is not in shot. And you can turn a nightmarish cinematic situation into something quite acceptable and very professional. Right, now this is all about trying to get a steady handheld shot, which in essence differentiates you between a professional and an amateur. And there's certain tricks that we've got, and first of all is an understanding of what's going on when you shake the camera. You see, the problem is the mind comes into play when you're shooting a shot. And what happens is, now I'll ask you to do a little experiment at home now. Wave your head from side to side while watching the monitor that you're watching, And you will notice that the TV or the monitor that you're watching still stays in the same position, right? That's because your mind has situated it there, and doesn't matter what you do with your head, it'll stay there. The problem is when you're shooting with the camera, the moment you start waving your head around, or the camera around, the person moves in relation to the shot. And when you suddenly, I'm sure you all noticed that things look fine while you're shooting, and then you go to the edit suite afterwards, and suddenly it looks a hell of a lot shakier than when you shot it. And you wonder why. Well, this is the reason why. Because while you're looking through the viewfinder, or through the flip-away screen, or through the viewfinder, your mind is doing the same thing. It's situating the object that you're shooting, and it's even though you're moving the camera, you are still seeing it as steady. And then when you get back to project it on a TV later, it looks shaky. The way to avoid this is to watch the edges of frame. And this is a professional cameraman's trick. It's what we do in order to make sure that we're steady. So watching the edges of frame involve noticing what is going on around the perimeter of your frame over here. And there suddenly, when you stop focusing on the person that you're shooting, or the object that you're shooting, and start noticing the edges over here, you suddenly realize, oh my goodness, I'm quite shaky. So just being aware of the shake allows you to suddenly, while you're watching those edges, settle down. And sometimes it requires you to take a deep breath, hold your breath because your breathing affects the shot, and steady up. Steady up completely. Notice those edges. And that's one trick of keeping things steady. The other is the method that you use to hold your camera. This hand here, no hand, single hand can keep a camera steady. It's very difficult. Bring in your other hand to operate some of the controls and to steady up the camera, and that will help as well. Another way of doing this is to undersling the camera. Hold it like that using the weight of the camera and support it underneath, and you can get a steady shot. But of course, the human body is very gelatinous and constantly in movement, so no one can really hold a steady shot, especially when you're zooming in, because once you've zoomed in, the tighter you are, the more difficult it is to hold that shot steady. Now, we're not worrying about focus now. So, what I would suggest is that if you can, and you're not changing the angle too much on your subject, get into the habit, come down, get into the habit of resting your camera on your knees. So the other method is to kneel down, rest the camera on your knee, leaving this hand available to adjust the controls of your camera, and it's a lot steadier because of the solidity of your foot on the ground. And then, of course, the most steady thing around is the ground, usually, unless you're having an earthquake. And that would involve putting the camera on the ground. A good assistant would always have a grovel pad for the cameraman to kneel on. And there you can see you get an absolutely steady shot from resting it on the ground and just supporting it with your hand. Very important, the steadiness of your shot separates the amateur from the professional. Of course, you can't always be on the ground because that creates a very strange angle on the subject. So what you would generally do is try and notice, if you can, something close by that you can lean against. Because when you lean against something solid, suddenly you become solid yourself. So let's try that. And you notice now that I'm a lot steadier than I was. And often there's something to put your camera on to just take away the handheld shake. So don't try and handhold a shot if you don't have to. And in general, unless the shot requires a little bit of shake for the mood and emotion of your scene, put it on a tripod. It takes a little bit longer, but it is professional. Sometimes you can get shots that you could sell worldwide as stock footage. It's just the professional way. Put it on a tripod and use it. But if you have to handheld it, notice the edges of your frame, breathe in deep, settle yourself, hold the camera in an easy way, lean against something solid, and make that shot perfect. Now we're talking about framing. That basically means a wide shot or a full shot, as they have in video terms, a 3/4, which cuts off at the knees, a mid, which cuts off on the belt, an MCU, which is generally round about the chest area, close-up, which includes a little bit of shoulder, and an ECU, which is an extreme close-up. Now, the big trick with this is that you need to get your headroom right, because this has been established for 100 years of this art, and most unprofessionals, most amateurs, land up giving way too much headroom in their shot. And it seems to be like you want to situate the person in the middle of the frame. This is completely wrong. You want her face in the upper 2/3, and that is way too much headroom. Lock this off in your mind. This is a proper wide shot. Okay? Now keep on watching the headroom. I'm going to go into 3/4, which involves just cutting off above the knees or on the knees and keeping your headroom very, very small. That's professional headroom for this shot. The amateur tends to want to do that. It's very bad framing and will be recognized as amateur. That's the correct headroom. And then your next shot, and by the way, are you aware of the gradations that we are making and why they're there? The next shot being the mid shot. The reason for the changes from the wide shot, from the wide shot to the 3/4 to the mid, is that because these changes are enough of the change in your framing to justify a cut between them. If you were to have a loose mid and a tightish mid, it's not enough of a change for the cut. It'll look like a jump cut. So that's why we change to the degree that has been decided on by convention by the professionals. Let's go to an MCU now. That was the mid. MCU, very little headroom. Take notice of the headroom now. Eyes in the top 2/3. If she was looking that way over there, you would give looking room so that there's proper looking room. And that's an MCU. A close-up is generally wider than most people expect. It catches a slight bit of the shoulders, and there's very little headroom over there. That is a proper close-up. And as you go tighter, you start moving into BCUs or big close-ups and ECUs, which is singling out a certain aspect of the face or body. You can have an ECU on the nose, on the eyes, on the hands. ECU means extreme close-up. The reason why we change with these particular graduations is allow us to cut between them so that there's no jump cut. There's enough of a change in your framing in order to justify the cut. And remember, professionalism is all about creating seamless editing, invisible editing. And that's why we do those changes to the degree that we do them. Have one of these things if you are intending being in the film and video industry. The glorious Leatherman.
The glorious Leatherman with the most important tool on it, which is your big screwdriver.
The bottle opener. Right, this is about looking after your lens and everything you need to know to really look like a professional and not to mess up your lens. It starts with having a plastic flower cap, which when you're not using the camera, keep like that, and that would help stop dust from getting through onto your lens. In general, you would always, to help save your lens, you would always have an optical flat filter in front of your lens, because the bottom line is the less that you clean your lens, the better and the longer it will last. It's as simple as that. Try and avoid cleaning your lens unless it's absolutely dirty. And the way to avoid it getting dirty is to keep it covered up with an optical flat in the front and with a proper little plastic shower cap that will help you. There are a number of ways in which to clean a lens. One of the ways is using a lens brush. If you're going to use a lens brush, make sure that you first clean the lens brush, getting rid of all the dust, using a bit of dust off. Now, dust off should never be just sprayed directly into the front of the lens, because for reasons is that sometimes some of the propellant gathers, and you'll see over here a little bit of white stuff that comes out initially as you start spraying. And that white stuff is very difficult to get off the lens. So what you would do is you would start spraying initially, and then at an oblique angle, give your lens a little bit of a spray. It's important not to put that propellant onto your lens. Now, if your lens is dirty to the point that you have to clean it, there are various levels of cleaning that you need to look at before you actually start rubbing away at the dirt. Now, in this particular case, some careless person has put a slight thumbprint on the front of the element of the lens. You need to understand that there's a very, very delicate protective coating that is on these lenses, and if you were to scrub away or mar the perfection of this protective coating, the optical qualities of your lens would be impaired, and that's not what you want. So, first of all, what you would start with is to get rid of any problems, give it a spray, come at an angle, and get rid of the dust. Because if you clean your lens when there's dust on it, all you're doing is you're rubbing the dust into that reflective coating, and that's no good. The best way of cleaning a lens is not to go and dribble lens fluid onto the lens, which is completely the wrong way. You first start with using the condensation of your breath. So if you were to breathe on the front of your lens, not spit, that is the best and least abrasive way of getting some kind of liquid onto your lens so that you don't actually rub the dust in. You only have a few seconds, so you'd land up breathing on it and then cleaning. This is supposed to be a lens or a filter cleaner. It's actually too abrasive for your lens. These over here are called Selvit filters, and Selvit filters are a branded version of filter cleaning. They're good enough for filters, but they're not good enough for your lens. Your lens has to have ultimately soft stuff. So lens tissue is the way to go, guys. Now, initially, as I explained, your lens tissue and your filter cleaners must always be kept in plastic bags. Now, lens tissue itself can be quite abrasive. What you need to do is take your lens tissue and tear it. Tear it along the length of it. And as you tear it, you'll see the little hairs start forming at the point of the tear. You tear a length of that, and then you roll the torn lens tissue up all the way so that you have these supremely delicate hairs that are the only thing that are going to touch your lens. Now, first we start off with a little bit of breath, a little bit of condensation. And then in a circular motion, and keep adding breath, in a circular motion, gently use those hairs to clean away You can sometimes, if you're using a lens brush, you can sometimes have a gentle stream of air coming onto the lens while you very gently scrape away the dust. That will move the dust as the brush hits the little dust particles. The air will help it move away, and you will not be causing any damage. Always in a circular motion always in a circular motion so that you keep the optical qualities of your lens correct. Now, if worst comes to worst and you really have to use a lens cleaner, well, bad luck, it's not good for your camera, but you'll have to do it. Once again, you don't rub your lens tissues directly into the lens. You use the little hairs, and do not ever put lens cleaning liquid onto the lens. You always put the lens cleaning liquid onto the actual cloth that you're using, and that goes for filter cleaning tissues and Selvits as well. You'd always put your lens cleaning liquid onto the actual cloth and then clean your filter. Okay, here we go. Now you can probably see that there's a certain amount of residue left on the front of that lens, and that comes from lens cleaning liquid. It's actually not a good idea to use unless you have to. So what we'll do is we will once again use the condensation of our breath to get this lens smearless and spotless. One of the things with practical videography is that we can use in our ditty bags various filters to diffuse, and one of the things that we like doing is to use a stocking to diffuse. Now, if you let any light fall on this stocking, it will cause a kind of a flare. So you need to either put the stocking on the over first. You take your elastic and you stretch it over so that it's nicely taut and even. Use a particularly good silk stocking would be the way to go. And then you put your matte box on. Well, this is hardly a matte box. And then you put your matte box on, and it will help stop the flare from bouncing off the stocking. Very nice to diffuse. The scene you're seeing has been set up to test the abilities of two cameras today on the aperture and focus side of things. And the cameras that we're comparing is the typical entry-level Handycam, single CCD. It records on DVSP, mini DV tape. And of course the 3CCD DV cam option, which is prosumer broadcast level type footage. Now, the way we're going to do this is that every time we manipulate anything, like
Focus, aperture, stop, or color temperature,
any of the buttons, we will record the video output of these cameras and you will see the effect. So we'll switch between the two cameras and you will see the effect on each shot. So it should be quite instructional. Right, let's put these cameras through their paces, starting with color temperature.
on the small camera. Then you've got to go into your menu and get into the list you want with white balance on it. Come down to white balance, press execute again, and now you can go to outdoor or indoor, or you can go to auto, which will take a white balance on this piece of white paper you got in the front there. Press execute and it will do it. Of course you must set it to hold so that it doesn't change the white balance while you shoot.
There you have the hold on. And we have a normally white balance shot.
If you need to color your white balance, or you want to color your picture in any way to change your mood, then you can actually, on the prosumer camera, you can do a white balance through a piece of, if you want orange, you take your complementary color, and which is blue, you take the complementary color of your orange, and white balance through it.
Take your
It
balance.
hasn't taken the balance. Click again.
Aha, you see it actually
There.
turn it.
Actually
white.
turns. As you pull it out,
And
you have
now-
a whole new cast to your whole picture.
Let's have a look at it. Alright, everything's come ultra orange.
Okay.
So, you can do the opposite of that.
Yeah, let's do the opposite of that and get it to a nice cold picture by putting in an orange instead. It's very orange. Press your white balance button.
White balance.
Take your fingers away from there so you can see. Yeah,
There we go.
that means it's gone blue.
Everything
Very
will go blue. You've told your camera, and there you can see you have a nice blue tinge to the scene. There are various other things we'd like to experiment. You can get some very weird color balances to help your creative look of your shots. By the way, here's your daylight setting, and that's your
Tungsten
setting. And you see it's not too different from the one we took, because we took it through a fully corrected blue filter, so it should be
Orange filter, actually.
Orange
we took
filter.
it through a
These things are balanced.
full orange, which
Yeah.
took us all the way to full blue
Correct.
to correct for that
Correct.
orange.
Now we say to the camera, tell us, make that white. And it is white, and when we see our scene, everything is colored normally. Try some weird colors,
that is.
Vincent. Try the green.
Okay, if you need to change
For
your color
creative
temperature.
purposes, like a music video, for instance.
Okay, yeah, music video, and you want to get everything a little bit magenta, you need to choose the opposite color, which would be something slightly greenish or yellow or something. You put your white balance in, put the translucent color in front of it,
Could be a filter or a gel or piece of glass.
and you see it changing there. So now it looks white as much as it
Look
can
what
get
the
it
white looks like now. That's gone really crazy.
White.
And
That's
let's
really
reveal our
purpley,
shot.
okay?
Purpley, yeah. And there.
There, compared. The lights we're actually using are daylight,
Yellow.
so that will look a little bit orange. If we go to tungsten, it's really blue because the lights are blue lights or white lights. So you've got your purpley magenta balance there. Now remember that the color balance is actually affecting your whole frame. You can see in the blacks as we lift that your blacks are actually turning into that magenta red color as well. But of course you're not exposing it. Black is black, and you'll expose the rest of them. They just get a slight tinge onto all of them. Another way to do it is to put the white in front of your camera. Now in front of the light that's actually falling onto the white piece of paper, you put a filter. When you put that filter there, you take your color balance. What's happening? White balance.
There we go.
Take your color balance with the light falling on there. It accepts it, and you'll get a different color coming out there. The complementary, the balancing color of that. Because I used purple, it went through to yellow.
Show us the blacks there.
If you change your exposure, you look into your blacks. By overexposing the blacks, you'll see that it's gone quite yellow. See all your yellows popping on your color chart? Okay? And you've got a yellow tinge compared to all of those others that you had, which are the sunlight. This is the correct lighting, a preset setting for the lights that we have here, compared to that slightly yellower tinge that you got there. Tungsten still gives you the blue. If you need your focus to move from your background to your foreground or the other way around, click into focus, go into manual, and then you move it. You can bring it forward to the darker head, or you can take it back further to the polystyrene head, which will leave that. You can only see it on your screen, so you've got to adjust finely until you get to the position you want. And then clear your menu from your screen. Getting focus on your prosumer camera is much easier because you have a focus ring on the front of your camera. You can actually pull focus to the object that you want to keep sharp if you've got too little depth to hold all of them. Or you can use your auto function by just switching up to auto on the focus switch, and then your ring has absolutely no effect. If you've got two objects on the side of frame that you want in focus, it's going to focus on the middle section of the camera, on the middle section of the picture at the back. It's going to focus because it's center weighted focus. If you want to focus on anything other than that center, you've actually got to bring it back manually with your ring so that it doesn't auto. And then you've got to leave it on manual. Otherwise it's going to hunt back to those objects in the middle of frame in the background. So remember, switch it on to manual, bring it forward to the object you want, or objects. If you are on manual and you just want to get a focus, to change your focus to another object, what you need to do is you can push auto. When you release it, it stays on there because you've left it on manual, and then you can come back to your shot. Start with page 1. Spot focus will take you into a smaller area. Let's go to there. I'm going to come across a bit.
Yeah.
If I touch
There.
There we go. There's your spot
There.
focus.
that's spot focus. If I touch this face here,
Goes back to there. Good, do it again.
it'll take it back to there. So you've actually got finger control of focus. If you accept anything in your menu, just press OK.
And it remains now on.
It remains on your foreground focus or the one you've selected. If you're getting exposure on your Handycam, look through the eyepiece rather than this screen so that you can get a nice judgment of your exposure. To get exposure, go into your functions, go into exposure, click onto manual, and then while you're looking at the picture, select what you want. Don't go too high, otherwise you blow out all your whites. Come down until you're satisfied with your overall exposure of everything. Don't go too dark, obviously, because you're going to lose the darker objects. You can go
What
from
is program AE?
program AE.
That is what
Execute would go into it. It would give you a couple of options such as Spotlight, Portrait, Sports. These are all
Auto exposure options.
auto exposure program options, which are auto spotlight, portrait, sports, beach and ski, sunset. I'm not going to go through all of these. Spot meter,
Yeah.
essentially the same as
Same
what your
thing.
spot
That's your
focus
light
is.
meter.
same as your spot focus.
Wherever you
The
touch.
spot focus, wherever you touch on your screen, will take a reading for that and expose your picture accordingly. If you touch on that face, it's going to darken down to make that face 18% grey. So you've got a problem there. You don't want to use spot focus unless you've got a grayscale or something evenly colored that's 28% reflective. Your auto exposure on that face would bring it down to a grayscale reading of that white, which would make it quite dark. Your glasses go very dark. If you go to manual, you might want to just take it up a bit, but not too much. in your wider shot, you will need to expose that white face up a bit, because your dark face in foreground can't go too dark. So you've got to balance between the objects in frame. Can't make your white get a lot of detail in it. You've got to choose your compromise between the two shots.
It's very important to have a very slow and smooth start on a zoom, otherwise it attracts the eye of the audience. And when you end your zoom, you must slow down and feather out that zoom.
In order to take a white balance, what you do is you fill the field of view of the camera with a white piece of paper. With the light of the scene that you are shooting falling onto the paper, you expose properly for the white, and then you take the reading by pressing the button. And when you come back to your scene, everything looks normal. If you have mixed illumination, blue from a window and orange from a light, you would need to take a white balance, allowing the blue and the orange light to fall onto your white, so that when you take the white balance, you're telling the camera, this is white. Right, now we're doing a brief recap on everything we've learned about focus, aperture, shutter and color temperature. The director has asked us to compose and expose and focus on a scene, and to get a professional shot out of what you can see now is hardly correct. The director's asked us to keep the foreground in focus with the background completely soft, or as soft as we can get it, and also to minimize the blur of the fan that we have placed in shot. This is our brief. We'll see how quickly we can do it to get a professional shot. Okay, so here we go. We're going to try for this. And we're starting off, of course, with a bit of focusing. You zoom in to get your focus. And of course, you keep the aperture wide open so that you can have the minimal depth of field, allowing you to set that focus critically. And when you zoom out, you can see things suddenly getting sharper. The wider you are, the sharper they will get. Okay, that's focus. Now, as you can see, there's something wrong with the color, and we take a white balance to fix that. Put the white in, fill the frame with white, click the white balance button, telling the camera what white is under those conditions. Remember to take the white balance in the conditions that you are shooting under, and then suddenly things look much better. Let's adjust the depth of field, minimize the depth of field so that the background can go even softer. Now take a look at those sunglasses and see how sharp they are. Well, they're somewhat out of focus, but it will get more out of focus the moment we add sunglasses to the camera, or ND filters. Here comes the ND filter, causing us to open the iris to expose the shot properly. Remember, we're exposing on the foreground figure, and look how much softer the background is. And our final task is to minimize the blur of the fan in the background. This requires us to up the shutter speed